Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back. This is the final session of Frames of References, and the topic for this panel is horror through a gendered lens. We have Ujjwal here with us. We had two more participants, but they had to drop out because of some emergency, Shrishti and Harnoor. So, before we start with the presentation, just a few things to keep in mind. Ujjwal, you'll have 15 minutes for your presentation, and all of you can post your questions in the Q&A box. We can start now.
So, very good evening to all of you. My name is Ujjwal, and I am a research scholar at Indian Institute of Technology, Roorkee, at the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences. So, to begin with, the title of my presentation is "She is Not a Chudel: Feminist Post-Human Becomings, Monstrous Realities, and the Post-Anthropocentric Aesthetics in Anvita Dutt's Bulbul," which was released on Netflix in 2020. So this paper is basically a think piece, and I'll be looking at two of the themes here: the feminist post-human becomings and monstrous realities, due to paucity of time. So I would like to enter this discussion through one of Atwood's really famous poem, this is a photograph of me, and try to draw an analogy with Anvita Dutt's presentation of Bulbul as a witch figuration in the movie. So, as you can see, it was taken some time ago. The photograph was taken the day after I drowned. And I am in the lake in the center of the picture, just under the surface. It is difficult to say where precisely, or to say how large or small I am. The effect of water on light is a distortion. But if you look long enough, eventually you will be able to see. So, but if you look long enough, eventually you'll be able to see me. Has this airy tone. So the phenomenal depiction and the treatment of the witch archetype in Dutt's cinematic universe, Bulbul reminds me of Atwood's poem and the line, "But if you look long enough, eventually you'll be able to see me." And interestingly, these lines can be reiterated to show how the female self is constructed, appropriated, and culturally morphed in Hindi cinema. Having said that, we find that the onus is on the viewer, the looker. If you look long enough, eventually you will be able to see me. And this is how we have historically come to look at and look for the female on the screen. Now I understand that we have come a long way from the preliminary constructions of women as victims, props, objects, and the insignificant others. However, to assume that we have experienced, witnessed, and withstood the injustices of the present, both on screen and off screen, would resemble a utopian resolution. Therefore, there's still a need to speculate, and thus the laborious task of making sense of our present day post-human existence shifts to the human, the we, as a positive becoming. We are witnessing a change in the essentialist dictums of portraying a woman on screen, which has been challenged by recent films such as Lipstick Under My Burqa, Razi, Dangal, Piku, Stree, Sheni, Paglet, and many more. Despite modulating on multifaceted approach to explicate agency, desire, conviction, and choice on the big screen and now on streaming services, these stories find close proximity with the ambition to articulate the so-called new woman of Hindi cinema through acts of subversion and become more than just a trend in the name of women-centric Hindi movies. So, the mainstream Hindi cinema, the new woman has always been a distinct transversal category which has inspired diverse theorization by depicting lived realities in considering the recent scholarship on female storytelling and various accounts of feminist genealogies, which foregrounded by Rosie Bradotti's formulation, and I quote, "We are not one and the same, but we differ. However, we who are not one and the same, but are in this together. The new and the collective we do not necessarily correspond to the ideas of westernization or the critical and creative pursuit to manufacture glorified figures of women as the naturalized, sexualized minority in the form of a deity or a mother figure corresponding to the emancipatory politics and promote a false sense of sustainability, but it is there to create a textual and a discursive space for creation and dialogue. On the other hand, in taking cognizance of the moving terrains in contemporary critical humanities, it is evident that the new is not synonymous with all, but takes into account the crisis in which understanding the body, being and becoming to serve as navigational tools to the post-human inquiry. What it means to be a human, and further and most importantly, what it means to be a woman in considering the empirical frames of investigation, which are also articulated by Donna Haraway in her work A Manifesto for Cyborgs, where she says, why should our bodies end at the skin or include at best other beings encapsulated by the skin? So I situate the text Bulbul at hand here, which is beyond the skin into the realm of the speculative. And Anvita Dutt's cinematic imaginary presents a tale of repression, inhuman brutalities, and gendered violence experienced by women, a category marked off as the sexualized other in the humanist discourse. Now, though it is set in the Bengal presidency in 1881, however, it frontlines a critical commentary on the present as it acknowledges the real life violence and recognizes systemic violence against the other. Further, the cinematic text encourages the speculative reimaginings of the alternate mode of existence of the human to produce multiple ways of knowing through the politics of subversion, and also provide a critique of anthropocentrism and the hierarchies of sex that have dominated the paradigms of patriarchal formulations in the socio-cultural context, especially in Hindi cinema. Here, the cinematic representation also draws a hybrid model of the uncanny, as we witness Bulbul, who's the titular figure, in a world full of patriarchs, pedophiles, rapists, where she is anchored with a nettle to restrict her flight, affirming a subservient mode of material existence. However, the complexity of the character rests in the favor of becoming Bulbul rather than being Bulbul, a planetary imaginary as dialectically opposed to the anthropos, which is the humanist man, the humanist I. So this binary, according to my reading of Anvita Dutt's Bulbul, presents this speculative positioning of the Chudel figuration as a post-human radical imagination, within which what we see is that the body and the body is just a vessel, and we move beyond the skin as she dematerializes into an alternate mode of existence and liminality, which can also be termed as speculative fabulation, a phraseology of Donna Haraway, as she dematerializes into an unearthly being towards the end of the movie. So the opening shot of the movie, we are introduced to Bulbul, where she is the child bride in blood red sari, seated on a tree branch, cryptically adjusting her posture with her baby feet. So the moving image focuses on her feet instead of her face, as the myth of the witch projects this fact that the witch have twisted feet. She is married to Indranil, who is an aristocratic landlord, much older to Bulbul, and the physical disapparateness and the alarming age difference between the bride and the groom sets the tone for an uncanny dystopia waiting to unfold as they come from two different worlds. As Badi Bahu of the Badi Haveli, she's introduced to Indranil's mentally impaired brother, his wife, who's Binodini, and much younger brother Satya. So what we see is that her sense of being is defined by her relations, which is a byproduct of her marriage. and she's figuratively placed in this symbolic social order. Cut to 20 years later, we are introduced to a fantastical world covered with weeds. The red fog covers the forest where the full moon turns red. Binodini is a widow because Mahendra is eaten by a chudel, and I quote, Indraneel has left town and Satya returns from London to set the patriarchal world order right as it should be because she's a woman. We are also introduced to the enigmatic Bulbul dressed in a sari and leather boots, dominating the household and becoming the hero of her own story. The cinematic positioning of the two contrasting scenes and the temporal leap functions as a critical and creative space for the speculative. And here I present three post-human feminist questions. Can the ontological exploration of the Gothic figuration, which is here as a witch, challenges the humanist subject? The second is, can the speculative representations of a critique of anthropocentrism while delinking the sexualized and the marginalized others? And third and the last is, what do we see as a viewer, an ontological point of reference, a churel or a post-human icon in Anvita Dutt's cinematic fable? So what we see is, as we witness the naturalization and the sexualization of Bulbul, the cinematic positioning of the two contrasting scenes, the child bride and the Bulbul as an adult as holding the household and becoming the hero of her own story, we produce an intricate alternative to the unidimensional approach in depicting the women as the naturalized other and the socially excluded category incapable of shedding one's own body as a canvas of victimhood. We witness Bulbul's post-human becoming of a chudel figuration through flashbacks, where we see that she's subjected to domestic violence as she articulates her agency, choice, and a sense of personal belonging as an adult and not as a child bride that we meet in the first shot of the movie. As she lays unconscious from the fatal wounds that have been inflicted on her by her husband, she is raped and then killed by Mahendra, who is his brother. Here what we see is that the real shows the horror rather than the speculative or the supernatural. The story enters the realm of the speculative here. The director, Anvita Dutt, uses the Gothic, the monster, and the supernatural as cartographic tools to depict the horror of gendered violence and rape. So what do we see? Do we see her as a chudel or a post-human icon or simply a victim? The simple answer to this question would be none of the above. However, we move to another question, which is, what is the function of the chudel archetype in our present post-colonial, post-human, biotechnologically advanced, technology-driven world? Needless to say that we find such archetypes in all cultures: zombies, jinns, superheroes, chudels, parasites, werewolves, to denote the anxieties of our present times. And the spectrum moves on to the representations of cyborgs and robots and aliens in post-apocalyptic fiction as well. However, the presence of witches in folklore and oral tradition is part of the historical construction and has always been part of the historical construction of the evil feminine other. Apart from the theological constructions of good and evil, the female other has always problematized the preconceived ideas of motherhood, power relations, patriarchy, and the monster who's lurking in the dark to prey on the innocent and generally men, which is highly anthropocentric in its approach. Further, the witch becomes the modern idea of a bad mother, a greedy consumer who sacrifices children to her own needs and fails to discipline their own cravings so that they become as monstrously greedy as she is. She also depicts marks the departure from the heteronormative functions of patriarchy while conjuring body dysmorphia. The morphed feat of a witch in mythic imagination is emblematic of the transformative notion of the post-human femininity, which is fueled by intentionality, agency, and diabolical otherness, a burden both repelled and repellent, a deep memory of well that is unapproachable and intimate, the abject other, in Kristava's terminology. Therefore, we witness a spectrum of Gothic imaginations in seeing the female other as an archetype for both change and conformity and the socio-cultural representations of the witch figuration in literature and in cinema. However, the answer to the question that I asked in the beginning of this segment was, what is the function of the tredel? The answer could be found in the reference to the idea of worldling in new feminist materialism, as the metaphor of the witch and witchhood is respeculated and refabulized. The hybridized tropes of the evil feminine who prey on men and the normative folkloric portrayal of the witch as a mother have moved beyond its conceptual limitation to facilitate a more adequate treatment of the witch figuration as a post-human icon to identify critical oppression faced by women today and in history as well. So what comes after the weirding of the reality? It becomes the existential dread. It is the abject that Bulbul finds in its becoming. She dematerializes and finds a discursive space in feminist belonging. She is liminal. She is the in-between and has opened a space which is by credit to speculative fiction, finds solidarity with the post-human other, even nature. Therefore, the feminist belongings in the space of the speculative opens a space for solidarity with the post-human other, and Bulbul as a witch figuration finds a much-awaited textual space in the feminist pedagogy of the post-human speculative imagination on screen. So here I would like to end my argument by throwing a question instead of giving a solution or a concluding remark. Is now that the speculative imagination has opened a space for the monsters, the so-called monsters, tredels, and the other than human figurations, what possibilities can we see as the speculative imagination continues to proliferate? A starting point would be to identify the critical oppression faced by the other as the women, the naturalized and the sexualized being. So thank you. This was the end of my paper. And since it's a think piece, I invite you to ask questions or give me suggestions regarding the same. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Ujjwal. Thanks for your brilliant paper. So I invite all the audience to put in their questions in the Q&A box. We have one from Harman ma'am. She is asking, both Bulbul and the film Stree have a subversive take on the figure of the chudel as seen in the Hindi cinema. Similarly, the Pakistani web series on Z Chudels take another kind of subversive turn. How would you view all these within your argument?
So should I give the answer here or should I type my answer?
You can give the answer, you can speak.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm not quite acquainted with the Pakistani web series, but I can talk about Bulbul and Stree, right? So first of all, what I see is that Bulbul is not a horror comedy. However, Stree is a horror comedy, so they both belong to different genres. However, they both are part of the speculative discourse. And yes, I agree with Harmanpreet Kaur that they both take a subversive take on patriarchy. But my argument would be that the presence of the other than human figuration, which is the witch, the writers or the directors of the movie are using this as an archetype, as a mythic construction to make us think differently, to make us to move beyond the fabulesque representation of women as dangerous, the historical representation of femme fatales or the damsels in distress. And there is another stark contrast between the two movies. Bulbul is her own hero. However, in Stree, we see the Rajkumar character helping the ghost to find her voice. So these are the two different aspects that I can see. Whereas the idea of the chudel, though it has come from the long historical construction of women as the sexualized beings and something to be careful about, and the ghost lurking in the dark to prey on men because they are innocent, which has a long historical tradition of the humanist other in humanist philosophy. The writers try to subvert it and use it to show the hypocrisy in the society. And that's why I have tried to term it as post-human, post as slash and human. So I hope it answers the question. However, I think these two films are not similar, but they are on the same terrain.
Meanwhile, I had another question for you. So you talked about how the mythic construction of the figure of a chudel and, in its witch metaphor asserts a subversive vision. My question is, often in the post-human, transhuman idea of a hero, it is a man. And despite the fact that in Bulbul's case and in the arc of a hero, there is power, assertion to save oneself, the community, and humanity. Of course, there's revenge too in both the cases.
Yeah.
How do you see this disjuncture between the post-human hero and a post-human witch?
Okay, so consider the idea of the post-human hero. Are you referring to the superhero movies?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So the superhero movies are generally constructed to showcase a sense of existential dread, that everything is finishing, we are about to die, and we have a savior, right? But when it comes to, let's say, in this particular paper, in the construction of Bulbul, she knows that nobody is coming to save her, right? So, and in one of the interviews where Anvita Dutt says that, why have you used the image of goddess Kali? So she says that, I want to give her a sense of agency and his divine intervention to showcase that she is not dependent on a man. She's dependent on some extraterrestrial power, right? So we never see her being constructed as a superhero. We never see her being constructed as a, let's say, a very flamboyant sort of a figure. We are unaware of her history. We are unaware of what has made her the chudel per se in the entire movie. We get to know about that in the flashbacks. She has no superpowers of her own. The only superpower that she has is that she's a woman. And that's what she says, that you all are the same. And that's how she stands out. So the idea of the post-human male superhero is I don't think it belongs to the realm of the post-human, because it is very anthropocentric. It does not move beyond the ideas of patriarchy. It does not move beyond the ideas of that survival instinct that I am a man and I'm supposed to save the entire universe, not just one gender. So I think that it can be used as a subversive tool to call out masculinist representations in popular cinema, but not here in the discourse of Bulbul. That's how I see it. But yeah, that's a very good question. Thank you.
Okay, so we have another question by an anonymous attendee.
Okay.
They are asking, how do you think the trope of female agency is explored in the subversive representation of the chudel in films like Bulbul?
Okay. So the female agency. Yeah. First of all, agency is agency. It's not female or male, right? So thank you for this question, first of all. So how do I see the female agency? When we move to the second part of the movie, first we are introduced to her as a child bride, and then we see her in in a beautiful sari, and she's a grown up adult, and she's ruling the household. There are no men around her, and she is the landlady, the Thakurine of the household. Her agency is something that she has taken from the perpetrators, that she has consumed. When she's having a conversation with Satya, there's this interesting scene where he asks, where is that little child Bahu that I saw when I was a kid? And she says, I gobbled her up. मैं उसको खा गई. So I think that becomes the starting point for Bulbul, showing her agency, a sense of becoming rather than being. Her being will specify her being the child bride who is submissive, who's supposed to be submissive, and is not the per se Thakurine of the house. She is the lady of the house. She's not the landlady of the house. So I think that her sense of agency is not derived from her male counterparts. It's derived from her becoming the so-called chudel, the so-called the man-eating woman in the entire village, which seems a bit provincial, but when you go deep into the story, into that dark forest, you see that there are palettes, there are atmospherics, and there are different, let's say, shades to this story. But her shade is always red. She is, she is, in her words, she's the witch, and that's how she also uses the term to show it to villagers that that there is justice in the speculative discourse. And I'm not like trying to say that her killing Mahendra and the other villagers is right. What I'm trying to say is that the speculative discourse gives you that opportunity or the textual space to find alternatives to your knowing, your sense of being and belonging. And here we see that the myth of Chudel and her agency, her sexuality, which I might say is not well placed in the movie. Like she does not use her sexuality to take revenge. And that's how I would not like to see it as, let's say, a fable. It's a post-human, for me, in my reading, it's a post-human icon in the feminist discourse. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thanks. I just had one more question, and this is on a more broader understanding of what is horror in Indian cinema now. So I just wanted to ask you that, do you think the current sharp rise in Hindu mythological films in the mainstream is changing the quote unquote new woman you were talking about to fit into Hindutva ideals? And do you think it is taking us back to the gendered embodiment and characterization of what is horror and what is horrid?
Yeah. Can you just like give me like 2-3 names of these movies that you're talking about? Like any one example would do.
Like, um, any such films, and we all know that currently in Bollywood, a lot of mythological films are coming up, and
Mythological, as in Sita and those sort of characters.
yeah, but like, do you think they are in some ways redefining, like you said, the new woman, and would it sort of find a congruence in the horror genre as well?
Yeah,
Because we all know horror in how it is constructed do come across through mythology and oral narratives and a lot of things.
yeah, I think it'll be, I feel that it'll be a step back. It's not a step forward. And to understand the politics of how the image of women are constructed in Hindi cinema, I would like to see it as one segment, but not in relation to the male counterparts. Like if the man is the the epitome of the masculine self, the female is supposed to be masculine as well. Right, like what I'm trying to say is that if a man is skilled in let's say archery, and she is also an archer, that does not pave way for equality. That for me it is a step back. How I would like to see it is it's already horrific in a certain way. However, as I also mentioned in the introduction of this essay that I just wrote, that I spoke here, that though we have come a long way from the construction of women as devis, victims, props, objects, to situate women in the present context, in a crisis, in something that she's going through, which can be as let's say ordinary as a father who is pestering her daughter on defecation, like what we saw in Piku, or it could be it could be rape in, let's say, in Bulbul. No matter how trivial or no matter how trivial or important the crisis is, we need to situate the new woman per se in its context, in our contemporary reality, and all the problems that have still not found voice, or that we have not presented. Let's say the LGBTQIA plus community, let's say a transsexual woman, let's say so if we are already finding problems with the woman asserting her agency, her sense of choice, let alone making them god-like figures, I think it'll be a step back, and it will not help us in moving forward until unless we situate that myth also in our contemporary existence and make it relevant now more than ever.
Thanks for that answer. If anybody has any more questions, please put them in the Q&A box or in the chat box. And yeah, I mean, do you want to say something else, Ujjwal? Is there something that it was very interesting how you started your paper with a poem, and be glad you did that.
Yeah, thank you so much. However, I'm really sorry because there are like a lot of technical glitches at my end. And
No, it's completely fine.
So, but thank you for giving me this opportunity to present my paper, and I hope you liked it. And if there are any questions, you can always email it to me. My email is also mentioned in the registration form that I filled. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. It was a really insightful paper. And if we don't have any more questions, we can close the session now. Sadly, we could not have more participants. Clearly, the fourth wave is showing its effects in this panel. And yeah, but thank you so much, Ujjwal. And
okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ujjwal. Thank you, Chandrika. And thank you to all the chairs and all the panelists. It's been a really, really very exciting, illuminating seminar. We've had lots of questions and some really exciting discussions. We will be in touch with some of you about publishing your papers. And it's it's an end to sort of 3 days of really exciting conversations. And as Chandrika says, unfortunately, we've had quite a few dropouts, many of whom either have COVID or are showing symptoms of COVID, and a few for other reasons, but mostly because people have had COVID. So that's been really unfortunate. But nonetheless, thank you very much to everyone who showed up, who's engaged, who's very thoughtfully been part of these 3 days. We hope that the next edition of Frames of Reference, which will be in 2024, will be on campus. And thank you again. Yeah.
Okay.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye. Thank you.